Good morning, everyone.
Raindrops.
John Giles, been with Gardener for about 10 years now. I've got specialties in both compost and vegetables. So I know what I need to do to amend my beds, and I know how to make my amendments put in my beds. So I've got a lot of good experience with it. And what we're going to be talking about today, Steve talked earlier about our starting point. You know, this is where we are. This is the soil that we've got. You know, do that soil test, figure out where we need to go. What we're going to look at today, or what I'm going to talk about pretty much, is the end point. This is what we need to do to actually get that bed ready to go to start putting stuff in it. I'm going to break the talk into 4 separate sections. You know, kind of because they're a little bit different on how we're going to look at them and just how we're going to deal with the original amendments to the bed. Talk about those preparations, talk about some maybe ongoing maintenance that we may want to think about all the time. And then the last slide has a couple of links for websites and stuff like that to get a little bit more information. So these are going to be the 4 sections we break it down into. Lawn, it's a garden bed. It's just, you know, a big monoculture of flat green stuff that I don't particularly care for. I'm too lazy and cheap to deal with a good lawn. So then we're going to go into like garden beds. Beth was talking about all the flower bed stuff that she had to deal with. That's what we're going to be talking about next. Then we'll get into a little bit on vegetable gardens, which are kind of the most specialty because you're really trying to pull a lot more out of the soil, so we need a lot more bed prep going in. And then because a lot of people are dealing with either very bad soil that they don't want to spend the money to amend, or they're in a small space where they don't have a lot of room to do, we're going to do like a container bed or container gardening raised bed type of section. First though, think about what we need to do to do all the bed prep. We need some tools to work on. So now's the time to go ahead and around, make sure you find all your old tools that may have been laying around all winter, get them cleaned up, sharpened, oiled up, make sure they're all nice and ready to go for the season. I can tell you tools like shovels and stuff work a whole lot better if you put a little bit of an edge on them. Okay, those flat-bladed shovels just don't work. So your mowers and any of the other lawn equipment like that, go ahead and get them up, running. Check them out, see if they work. If you did not empty the gas out of it completely, run the things dry last year before you put them up, you're going to have issues with varnish building up in the carburetor, so you might want to have to worry about that. So go ahead, get those motors out, get them started. Make sure any gas that was in the thing is now out of the thing before you put it in. Go buy some fresh gas and put it in. Gas only lasts about 6 months before it goes bad. Okay, so you want anything you had from last year is bad. Dispose of it properly. Okay, so get those all prepped and ready to go. Then we can start dealing with all of our fun stuff to deal with. Now, each of the sections I've got, I'm going to break into 2 separate sections, both an established and a new version of that bed. Okay, so when we're talking about the established lawns, you know, we've got our soil sample back. You know, it says, you know, we need to do this sort of amending, whatnot. One of the things that we can do to help our bed, our lawns, is add a little bit of compost. Like I said, most of our stuff around here is going to be a lot of high clay content soil. And so that soil is not going to be able to absorb a lot of that moisture right off. So if we add a little bit of a layer of compost, we're talking an inch or so of compost, we can do it straight over the top of the soil, don't have to mix it in or anything, and just go ahead and add that in. It will slowly get absorbed into the soil, worms will help transport it, carry it down into the soil, and it'll slowly amend that soil, especially if we do this year after year, and we can get a much better, healthier soil mix for our lawn to be growing into. When we're talking about things like fertilizer, Steve was talking, okay, you base all your fertilization off of your soil sample. For the most part, a lot of us are just going to be going with something like a 2500 soil fertilizer to add in. High nitrogen, don't need any phosphorus, don't need any potassium pretty much for most of our soils around here. So we're going to be adding that in. Key thing to think about on that, do not fertilize your lawns until after the second time you've mowed it for the year that it's been growing. So for something like a Bermuda grass lawn, which is probably not going to even start greening up until the end of this April. You know, mow it that first time, mow it that second time, and then apply your fertilizer. Okay? That way it kind of helps get that grass growing. It gets it into the cycle where it needs to be starting to pull in some nitrogen, and that way you can go ahead and get the nitrogen in when it really needs it. If you do it a little earlier, especially like now, before, you know, a month or two before it's really going to start growing, you're not going to be feeding the grass so much as you're going to be feeding the weeds. Okay? Everybody talks about, you know, ooh, I got a weed and feed type fertilizer. Don't buy those. You're fertilizing the weeds that you're trying to kill. Okay? It's not feeding the grass for the most part. So we want to go ahead and hold off on that. Yes, sir?
Is there a certain type of compost we should use?
No, just a regular compost.
Like a lawn type compost? I guess?
There's not a lawn compost, it's just compost.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, any compost works. So. If you're going to be doing something like a pre-emergent for weeds, for the most part, the weed, anything you see green in your yard right now is probably a weed, probably henbit, probably mustard, a couple others, maybe some rescue grass, which is kind of like an annual ryegrass weed. Those things should have had a pre-emergent done in the fall. Okay, so if you put a pre-emergent down now, your pre-emergent is for the really hot summer weeds. Okay, so you need to get that down and get it down now before anything else happens. One thing to think about when we're dealing with pre-emergence, though, especially if you have a St. Augustine grass. St. Augustine grass, the way it grows, it spreads by runners going across and then the roots dropping down every once in a while. The problem with pre-emergent is it creates a barrier on the soil, so that when that root goes to penetrate into the soil from that St. Augustine, runs into that barrier and can't tap in. And so that St. Augustine grass, after a couple of years of consistent pre-emergent use, will actually kill off your St. Augustine lawn. It's just something to think about there. Which is also one of the reasons we recommend Bermuda grass for our lawns. Because it works a whole lot better and you can't kill it. Right now, a good thing to do, since it looks like we've probably got past our last frost, all the mesquite bushes are out and blooming and starting to get pretty now, so Mother Nature sort of says it's done with winter. Go ahead and do a light scalp across your yard. Okay? Now, when I say light scalp, I'm talking, you know, down to about an inch. What you're trying to do is take all of the dead stuff that's been sitting there all winter, just kind of chop it nice and low, preferably nice and fine, and just leave it on the grass, and it'll eventually break down into the soil. What that does is it allows the sunlight into the soil a little bit more. It dries out the soil a little bit, but it allows that soil to warm up a little bit better. So you might get your Bermuda grass growing up, you know, a week or two earlier than normal, just because you've heated up the soil a little bit more. Yes, ma'am?
What about when you do the scalping, because you have weeds?
Don't worry about it. You're trying to get rid of the weeds anyhow, so.
But it's not going to make more weeds?
No.
Okay.
Unless they've already gone to seed. And you can't really help that too much. So, any questions on established lawns? Yes, sir.
You talk about the light scalping. What if your yard is already bad, okay? And you only have, I don't know what to call, I know the weeds, but they're little clumps that just grow all around. So now if I scalp those, do I go back after and fertilize or no, do I go back and add maybe zoysia grass or something?
Depends on what you're doing. Now, if it's a weedy grass that you don't want in there, scalping that clump of grass, not going to hurt. Not going to do anything but maybe kill that weed off a little bit better. That's why I say a light scalp. A heavy scalp will come down and actually cut the crowns of your grass out, and that can kill the grass. So if you go down too low on your scalp, you're going to actually do some damage to your yard. All you're just trying to do is just trying to get it down a little slower to let a little bit more room into the soil. And as for coming back to something like a zoysia or even a Bermuda, that would be a really good thing to do. Now, when we're talking, yes ma'am?
Real quick, back on the established, have you had any exposure to the hydrotrain or a water saving kind of additive to put on your lawn?
No, I have not. Never heard of anything either.
Could you repeat the questions, please?
Okay, the question was, there's a solution you can put on your ground to supposedly help with moisture retention and that sort of stuff, and it doesn't affect it.
We had one of our master gardener speakers in our class that talked about those granules.
Right.
Oh,
And he was from Lubbock, and he said they haven't really been able to establish
That helps.
too much benefit from it, so.
Thank you.
And-
One last one.
John?
Yes, ma'am, oh, sorry.
Define light scalp, how many inches?
Say maybe an inch. So if you're normally mowing at about 3 inches, cut it down to 1 to 2 inches. Yeah, just something to get it down as low as you can without actually doing any damage.
And that's your first mowing, basically?
No, that's a pre-mow, basically. That's just to try and keep everything down and low. And then once it starts growing, you're looking at your 2 mows after that. Now, when we're talking, trying to put in a new lawn, a lot of people, we've got a lot of people moving out towards us down in Potosi, a lot of new subdivisions, so we're getting a lot of new lawns. The problem that we have with most home builders, they've run bulldozers, concrete trucks, all the mechanical guys, when they're in there working on it, they're parking their trucks in the front yard. So you've got some heavy compaction on your front yard when they're building the house. Then they'll come in and they'll take dirt, and not soil, just dirt, kind of throw 2 or 3 inches on top of it and call it, that's your lawn. They'll either seed it or sod it, just depends. And so that's not really a good base. So if you're looking for something, now's the time to really work with maybe your home builder if you're dealing with that. See if you can kind of get them to do a little bit of preparation on that ground to actually get something to be useful for you later on. Okay? First thing you're going to need to know is, are you going to do seed or sod? Okay? Sod gives you an instant lawn. Seed is going to take a little bit longer, take a little bit more water to establish. But you can get a little bit different varieties on that. Now, most of the Bermudas that we recommend, if you're doing common Bermuda, you can actually do it by seed. St. Augustine, you can do by seed. Any of the hybrid Bermudas or zoysia grass, which we also do recommend, any of those you actually need to do from a sod. A little more expensive sometimes, but you can get a lot better quality grass out of it. Now, before you actually put in your lawn is actually the best time to amend. You can actually do something to improve that soil structure and quality before you actually get your lawn in. So recommend a couple inches of compost. Okay, you're going to hear this line all the time from me. Compost. Compost is the miracle drug for us around here. Okay, it solves sandy soil problems, solves clay soil problems, solves high pH problems, solves low pH problems. Compost is what we always use to help our soils. Yes, ma'am?
Is there a location where we can get compost in bulk?
There is one location in town, but as a master gardener, I cannot recommend any place officially. But there is one place located over on Treadway that does sell bulk compost. Like I said, that is the only place in town that I know that sells it. Now, when we're talking compost, and I said heavy amount of compost, 3 to 6 inches of compost would be good. Now, if we're talking, a yard that's, 30 by 50, that's 1,500 square feet, 3 inches of compost is going to be 15 yards of compost, something like that, over that area. That gets expensive, but long-term, that helps your soil so much that it is well worth it long-term, because you won't have nearly the problems that you will have having to fight that hard clay soil long-term. Yes, ma'am?
What if you have a yard that has been neglected for lots of years and is mostly weeds? At that point, would you just try to start over?
That's actually not a bad problem at that point. Yeah, because you can go ahead, you can come through, you can till up the whole yard, throw some compost in, till all that in, and then start fresh. Okay. Another thing you can do while you're in there working on that brand new lawn that you have, go ahead and throw an irrigation system in. You know, the best time to do it is now before everything's established. You can go ahead and run either a regular pop-up sprinkler type system, or you can go ahead and run in a drip irrigation system. A lot of people will say that it doesn't work real well for drip irrigation on lawns. I can tell you it works wonderful. It's a little more expensive to install because there's a lot more drip line that you're going to have to install, as you can see by the picture here, because you're going to drop a line every foot, so it burns up a lot of drip tape and a lot of water at a time, but you're actually dropping that water right where it actually needs it in the root zone. So it makes a very good time to drop into your irrigation system. When you are amending, a lot of times, you know, we have to think we're going to be talking about high nitrogen type grass, you know, or high nitrogen need on the from the soil, so we're going to try and add usually a little bit of extra nitrogen based off of our soil sample if we've got one. Now, if we're doing new soil like this is the time really to get that soil sample before you amend. That way you can tell if you do need to add a little bit of extra phosphorus and potassium into your soil. So, any more questions on lawns? Now, garden beds. We're talking flower beds here when we're talking garden beds, all right? One of the problems with established garden beds, a lot of the soil amendments that we recommend, you can't really till into an existing bed. So a lot of times what you're going to have to do is add a little bit of compost, but a lot of times we're recommending a couple inches of mulch on top of that. So what you're going to have to do for that soil amendment, pull back the any mulch that you may have on top of the soil, pull that back, add your compost in. If you want, you can kind of mix it in a little bit, maybe just pitchfork it and just kind of work it in a little bit as you go around, and then just add the mulch right back on top of it. Okay? There's not going to be a whole lot you can do with a tiller, especially when you're working around established plants. If you can have some spots that you can till in and add some things like expanded shale, that actually will help a little bit break up the soil of a clay soil, and it's allowed it to break it up so it's not quite so concrete once it dries out, and it retains a little bit of soil moisture while it's in that real dry phase, and so it actually keeps the soil fairly loose while you're dealing with it. It doesn't take a whole lot to improve the soil a fair amount. Go ahead and mulch, heavy mulch. When I'm talking heavy mulch, this isn't that 1-inch mulch that you usually see in all the beds around town. I'm talking 4 to 6 inches of heavy wood, usually a wood chip type mulch. Okay. A lot of people will swear by the either the cypress or the cedar mulches that are more of a shredded variety. Because they do kind of interlock together, and you end up with a mulch blanket on top of your soil. It prevents it from blowing away, floating away. I personally just do chips, but at 4 to 6 inches, it's usually not much of a problem with it blowing away or actually washing away, except on the few spots that I've got a little bit of a hill, and that's easily to adjust after heavy rainfalls. Mulch is extremely beneficial for your garden, okay? And when I'm talking mulch, I'm not talking pea gravel or anything like that. We're talking an organic material type mulch, so wood chips, straw, hay, that sort of stuff. What it does is, there's a couple of key things. One, it shades the ground. They've done studies. You do a temperature probe on top of the soil, or on top of your mulch, and you'll be reading 110, 120 degrees a lot of times. Drag the mulch off the way, get the soil temperature right there at the surface, just under those 4 inches of mulch, and it'll be 75 degrees. Okay, so you can see a 30 and 40 degree temperature difference just between, with a couple inches of mulch on top of it in the middle of summer.
What about organic mulch? I'm talking wood chips.
Wood chips.
Because, yeah, do you have any suggestions?
If you want to get, I believe it's free, but I'm not, and they might charge a little bit, is the city of Abilene over at their brush recycle center.
Right, but you don't know where all those trees are coming from either.
Doesn't matter.
It doesn't?
Now, once they've been chipped up and shredded like that, they've dried out and there's no issues with diseases or anything being carried into them. They're dead, they're hard, dead chips at that point.
Even chemicals that could have been on the trees? That's
There-
what I'm concerned with.
There could be some chemicals, but more than likely you're getting as much chemicals just dropping out of the standard rainfall as you're gonna get from those mulches. Unless you're dealing with the dyed mulches, okay, which will have a lot of colorings in them, which I don't usually recommend, at least around vegetable gardens or anything that might be edible. So a lot of times I do recommend, especially people in town, to go ahead and put, you know, maybe some veggies or edible stuff like herbs and stuff in their flower gardens up front because they look pretty, but you don't want to have a colored mulch in those. Yes, sir.
Last I checked over there at the city recycling, they'll give you that recycled mulch fine,
Yeah,
but the finer, more fine.
the second
shredded-
chop, yeah.
Yeah, I think you've got to actually be a gardener,
I think
What they
you can get the second chop, I think you have to pay for it.
Yeah.
$7.
Right.
It's like $7 a yard or something like that, which isn't bad for, I mean, I think mulch.
And that's if they load it. If you
Yeah, if they load it. If you load it, I think you can do it for free, even the second chop.
Right.
You know, if you're looking at bag mulch, you're probably looking at $30 or $40 a yard. So it's a lot cheaper source.
What department is that for the city?
The waste, yes, so it's the recycling center, the brush recycling center. It's under the sanitation department.
Yeah, it's East Highway 80 and Loop 322.
Thank you.
I don't know, was I going?
John,
Yes, sir.
that brush recycling, do you have to be a resident of Abilene in order to obtain it?
You have to be a City of Abilene resident.
Not necessarily by.
Okay, officially, yes,
Yes.
you're supposed to be a citizen,
But
but
they don't
they
check
don't
their
think,
license.
I don't think they check. I think they're just trying to get rid of as much as they can, so. And if all else fails, find a friend that lives in town and, you know, have him go with you.
Taking stuff to it, you have to be a resident.
Yeah, if you're dropping off, you have
From.
to, I know. But to get it, you can probably get around.
Where is that located?
It's on Highway 80, right before you hit 322, going from in town to out of town. If you hit the City of Abilene's website, you can just get their address.
So the second chop is the better mulch?
The second chop is a little bit better. It's a finer grade mulch. The first grade a little bit chunkier. I mean, you'll get some occasional big chunks. So it's a little bit finer, a little bit prettier looking when it lays down. The one problem I have heard about City of Abilene mulch is occasionally you will get some trash into it. You know, plastic bags, bottles, that sort of stuff. Any of the non-purchase stuff from the store, a lot of times will have that sort of things in it. Even some of the stuff I've gotten from the store, occasionally I'll find bits and pieces of plastic. So, you never know what you can get sometimes.
So, John,
Yes,
what
ma'am.
I hear about the dyed mulch is that it's pallets that are shredded.
Oh yeah, so the dyed mulch are pallets.
What I've heard.
Okay. Well, even, you know, it's more of the dye coloring that I'm worried about. Although some of the pallets may also be pressure treated lumber.
Yes,
So,
exactly.
but that depends on the particular pallet. Okay. Yes,
On
ma'am.
that second mulching.
Second chop mulch,
Yeah. Can we just leave that on our bed and like the following year, just put more on top and that'll eventually, will it work?
Yeah.
into the
What
soil?
happens with the organic mulch, and this is one of the reasons why we recommend it highly, is that layer between the dirt and the bottom layer of the mulch will slowly decompose and turn into basically compost for you. And so that layer of mulch will slowly shrink over the year, and then you can go ahead and add on to it another layer the next year, and it'll slowly just build up the soil level with that compost. To give you an idea why I recommend 4 to 6 inches of mulch. Okay, this garden bed here, as you can see, it's probably about 40 feet this way, about 10 or 15 feet this direction. And then I've got another section that goes 35 feet that way, is about 30 or 40 feet wide also. Okay, that's a large flower bed. I spend, on average, about 5 minutes a week de-weeding that whole flower bed. And that's not weeds that have grown up through the mulch, that's more of weeds that have landed in the top, taken root, and actually started to seed in. And so a lot of times I can just kind of come by and just knock it over, and it'll kill off the weed. So, and realistically, it's about every 2 to 3 weeks, I'll walk through the garden bed and just kind of kick the few weeds I need. I mean, it's wonderful to have that much mulch on it. Saves a lot of time. Other questions before I go on to new beds? Okay, new garden beds. Now, we're talking, unless we're doing something like a lot of natives, where we don't want to do a whole lot of soil amendments to, improve the soil because they don't, too much amendments can actually hurt them. We're going to try and amend it a little bit more, a lot more compost. Now, the thing about this is, if you've got a garden bed laid out where you've got areas that are planted and then areas that may not be planted, if you notice here, there's a whole section right in here that's not planted. If I'm not going to plant something in this garden bed, I just want to have it kind of as a little blank field. I might have some statues or something like that. There's no point in amending that soil unless I want to actually have something growing. So you don't have to spend quite as much money adding in the extra compost to kind of build that soil. You can go ahead and kind of work around that, just to the areas you're going to be planting. I'd go ahead and I'd make sure you add in 3 to 6 inches of compost, add in a little bit of expanded shale if you've got a clay soil. Those will help build them in, till them in nice and deep, and then you can go ahead and do it, build your bed. This is also, again, another good time to add in a sprinkler system, okay? Especially if you do a drip system, you can lay it all out and put that in right underneath the mulch. And this will work very well. You won't even see any of the lines. They'll stay out of the way. And it works real well for keeping those plants nice and watered without any real issues. The one thing you do have to think about with drip irrigation systems like that that are under the mulch is occasionally you will spring a leak, usually from things like squirrels or something kind of chewing on the lines. So you're going to want to go out every couple of weeks when the system's set to run, or you just go ahead and set it to run. Go listen for it. And one of the neat things about most of the drip systems, you turn them on and they'll kind of hiss at you. Kind of sound like a little bit of a snake kind of slithering through things. It goes shh as it kind of builds all the air out of the system, and then it'll stop as it starts dripping. Well, if it keeps hissing, or if you hear running water, you know you've got an issue. Okay, so, and then after you've run the system for an hour to give your 1 inch of rainfall, you can come back and go, oh look, there's a puddle here, I've got a problem. And so you can kind of look at that. So those are the 2 ways to do a quick check on making sure your systems don't have any big leaks. Like I said, again, once you've got your bed in, got it planted, heavily mulch it, again, nice good organic material. Okay?
John,
Yes, ma'am.
you don't, no weed barrier, no,
Weed barriers, you don't have to do a weed barrier if you don't want. For me, that 4 to 6 inches of mulch is my weed barrier. Okay?
so if I may ask you, I have a bed,
Yep.
Greg's Mist grows in there.
Yep.
And it, and then I have morning glory that kind of chokes it out
Yep.
throughout the year. I've cleaned this bed out 3 times. This is the last time I cleaned it
Yeah.
out. It just grows all back. Should I put a weed barrier down first before I want to plant something that's not Greg's Mist and takes over the whole bed?
Okay. So the question is, we've got an existing bed with a lot of Greg's Blue Mist and some Morning Glory that's kind of taken over. Should she put weed barrier down? Quite possibly. I mean, Greg's Blue Mist does spread pretty good. Morning Glory, especially if it's the native style Morning Glory, which a lot of times is called bindweed. It can spread and it takes over.
Try cardboard.
Yeah, cardboard may work well to help kind of keep a good weed barrier. That will break down after a year or two.
So amend my soil with some cardboard and then my mulch.
Yeah, and then that'll kind of help keep everything suppressed underneath of it, at least hopefully for a year or two until everything kind of dies out, and then you can kind of work with it.
Sounds good.
Okay, vegetable beds. Now, I say vegetable beds are kind of that unique specialty because vegetable beds, we're trying to do pull a lot of nutrients out of the soil and get them into the food that we're actually trying to eat. So we're usually having to do a lot more amendments of that soil and a lot more fertilization in that soil. Okay. For the most part, we're still going to recommend going to do that soil analysis, especially the first year before you start a new bed. But if you've got an established vegetable bed, a lot of times you can kind of look and see what's going on in that garden from last year and see what you need to do with it. So if you were doing a heavy feeder like a tomato last year in this particular area, you're probably going to have to amend the soil, not only with the nitrogen to help build the soil up to help grow, but if you've got a lot of fruiting plants, squash, tomatoes, cucumbers, those sorts of things, they're going to be pulling a lot of potassium out of that soil, so you're going to have to be adding extras of that. So this is one of the few times that I actually do recommend just, not pay attention to that soil analysis to kind of see where you're at to start with. But after that, it's kind of keep an eye out on what you're growing, what's growing well, any issues that you might start having with those plants in the way of deficiencies, and just go ahead and keep a good, balanced, fertilized routine going throughout the year. Compost is going to be critical with your vegetable beds. It helps build that soil structure. It keeps the pH closer to a 7 as opposed to the 7.5 or maybe 8 that you might be running. That lower pH helps all those nutrients be absorbed into the plants a little bit easier. And so you can get a lot, you don't have to have quite as much to make sure you get the production out of your vegetable garden. The other things to think about with that compost, because you're at a much more balanced soil structure, the varieties of vegetables that you grow can be a little bit wider. We have a list, if you go onto the Aggie Horticulture website and look for vegetable varieties recommended for this, for Taylor County, it'll give you a list of, maybe 3 or 4 types of, each of the vegetables of this is what's recommended for the soil, basically based off of the native soil. But if you're adding a lot of compost to your soil, you can kind of really spread out what you're actually doing in varieties. You don't have to be stuck with just those couple. And especially if you're doing a lot of soil amendments, you can do that really well. As long as it can take our heat and drought that we have going on through the year. But drought, we usually are going to be doing a lot of irrigation anyhow. So a little bit of expanded shale also into the soil kind of helps do it. Because we're dealing with a vegetable bed, we usually don't have as much in the way of perennial plants stuck into there. So a lot of times we can go through and till up the beds and add in the amendments and actually till them in. So it's not much of a problem. Unless you do have, I have like a rosemary bush that's in my vegetable bed to help attract pollinators. And so I got to be careful working around that to be careful, so I don't do any root damage to that. Mulch, again. Now, note the difference. This says organic mulch as opposed to organic material mulch. Still dealing with an organic material mulch, so wood chips, wood, straw, hay, something like that. If you're going to be trying to do a fully organic type garden, that material probably should be more of a true organic, certified type organic material. Doesn't actually have to be certified organic, but you may want to think about, okay, if you're spreading a hay or a straw onto your vegetable crop, what is that crop been sprayed with? A lot of straw is more about like a wheat straw type, product. A lot of the wheat products are sprayed with Roundup right near the end stage to dry out the wheat before they harvest it. And they try and do that to get all of the wheat harvested at the same time. Well, if you can't, if you're putting that straw onto your garden, you're now adding something that had glyphosate sprayed on it. You may or may not want that in your vegetable garden. So just kind of keep that in mind when you're dealing with, what you're putting down for a mulch. I don't know of any actual mulches that are certified as organic, but if you look at the labels, you can usually read through them and go, yeah, there's something that's obviously I don't want to put into my garden for veggies. Yes, sir.
There's one place in town that sells mulch. It's mixed with cottonseed
Okay.
from gins.
Yeah, cottonseed burr.
Do you run into the same problem with possible defoliants being used?
I have not seen or heard anything about that specifically. I usually stay away from anything that is cottonseed or cottonseed burr type product because I know most of the cotton in the country is actually sprayed with glyphosate. Okay, and I don't want to deal with those. So that goes for cotton burr compost or anything else. But that's just my personal opinion. I don't have anything that says specifically that that's been a problem anywhere. Yes,
What
ma'am.
about mushroom compost?
Mushroom compost should be pretty good because the mushroom compost is a fungal, and so it's a much more organic by nature product because they haven't been able to spray it with anything anyhow. Yes, ma'am.
Is it possible for mulches to harbor pests? I'm thinking of squash bugs around the zucchini plants.
Okay. Can the mulches harbor pests? Yes and no. Okay. Can they bring them into your yard? Possibly. Realistically, the big pests that you'll get coming in with mulch is actually pill bugs, because pill bugs are decomposers. They're there to eat dead material. A couple of years ago, I remember there was a really big problem with pill bugs. We had a very wet year. There was a lot of organic material that was on the ground, and people were losing their entire veggie crops as they popped up. The pill bugs were just coming by and eating them flat. But for the most part, the pill bugs will only eat dead material in there. But they also like fresh seedlings too. So if you're planting a harvested plant or a transplant in, it's usually not a problem. Now, once the mulch is down on the ground, yes, it can become a home for pests. The concept that you use there is, yeah, you've given them a home to live in, so now you just have to make sure you have a home for the predators that are going to eat those bugs. Squash bugs are one of our really big problems. There are multiple things that you can do for squash bugs to help combat them, even organically, which I'll get to. Just talk to me offline. I've got some recommendations on squash bugs specifically. So. Any other questions? Okay, new vegetable beds. Very similar to what we're talking about with the original ones. Lots of compost, a little bit of expanded shale, or mulching once you've got it down on there. Now, a lot of times with veggie beds, sometimes if you don't want to go with the expanded shale, you can also go with things like vermiculite or perlite. Just remember that if you are using those products, they're a bit powdery, and you probably want to put a mask on to protect yourself from the dust on that. Okay. Now, this is what my garden used to look like in Midland. As you can tell, the soil, absolutely horrid. It was a sandy clay mix, which people are like, oh, sandy clay loam. No. Sand clay soil. Worst of both parts. The clay would solidify into a rock. It would rain, it would sit there, and you'd have a puddle on top of the soil for about 3 days. It would get just enough moisture in it that it would become, it could start absorbing the moisture, and then the sand portion of it would take part, and the water would just vanish. So you never had any way to maintain any moisture in the soil structure. So this is about a 25 by 50 plot. This is what it looks like, putting 15 yards of compost out, one wheelbarrow at a time. Not fun. This is all compost that I made, though. So this, if you look at the compost that you can buy at the store or any of the stores, doesn't look this rich and beautiful. This was some really good compost that I made.
So,
You can
on
find
the-
it in the-
Yes, ma'am.
the compost, what's your definition of compost? What's that made, what is that?
Compost is basically organic material that is decomposed to a soil-like substance, okay? Usually you'll take compost, it'll be some high carbon items, wood, dried leaves, that sort of stuff, mixed in something with a lot of higher nitrogen content, could be a manure, could be green material. A lot with moisture, it'll decompose. And once it decomposes,
What's the ratio of manure and leaves and?
depends on what you're using specifically. And I'll talk about some resources on the compost and how to make it here in a minute, okay?
And you're talking, and your coffee grounds. and
Coffee
your
grounds would be like
eggshells.
high nitrogen, eggshells in moderation. So, like I said, I'll talk about a couple things for compost here in a minute, okay? So it's just, once that decomposes into a soil-like mixture, it's called humus officially, that's what you're mixing in. It's high organic material and very, very loose and flat. It's beautiful stuff. This is what that 15 yards of compost, this is about 2.5 inches of compost over that whole area, maybe 3 inches. And that's what it looks like once you've tilled it in. So if you look, there's a little bit, right in here you can see the original soil color, and then just that little bit made a huge difference in the soil color. Yes, ma'am?
Do you have to till it in, or could you just leave it on the top and then plant?
It is highly recommended to till it in, because that, if you're doing it as an established bed where you can't till it in, then yeah, you can just top dress it and nature will take care of it. Either through rainfall washing it in, or worms going up, pulling it in and bringing it down. But if you can till it in, it helps build that soil structure several inches down all at one time. Okay? So it helps build it a little quicker for you. Yes, ma'am?
John, I heard one of the previous presenters say something to the effect that if, well, I guess we'll talk about this in raised beds, but you can just plant in compost alone.
Yep. Now, they say officially that there's such a thing as too much compost. I'm like, have you ever seen what a plant looks like that's growing in your compost bin? It's usually about yay tall and yay big, and there's like fruit everywhere on it. I'm like, as far as I'm concerned, you cannot get enough compost. Okay? Yes, ma'am?
How deep did you till that?
We ran that about 6 to 8 inches. Basically, as deep as that tiller. Yeah, the problem with tilling, and tilling's great because it kind of mixes everything in. The problem you'll run into is, especially if you till repeatedly, you go down to a certain depth and those tiller blades will get that nice polished warmth right at that tilled level, and it gets a hard pan, and so soil moisture can't go past that a lot of times. Now, with clay soil, we're used to that anyhow, so it's not that big of a deal. But that whole area that you've got will allow it to drain through a little bit into that.
If that's deep enough to grow.
That's usually deep enough to go ahead and anything beyond that, a lot of times the roots can just kind of keep growing, but it's fine. Yes?
Did you till the ground before you put the compost on?
Yes, I did. Because if you look, you can see little bits of grass and stuff. That's what the yard looked like beforehand. Okay, so it was a turfed, semi-turfed lawn. I mean, we're talking Maryland, so it was the scraggly common Bermuda that was there. Maybe 25% of the actual ground was covered with Bermuda grass. So what we did is we went in, we tilled up the whole plot. We went through, because I was trying to do a vegetable garden, I didn't want to spray Roundup. We went through with a wheelbarrow and a sieve that we made with 1/4-inch hardware cloth, and every ounce of that garden bed was shoveled up, dumped into it, sifted through, and all of the grass was pulled out by hand. I never had a problem with Bermuda grass in that area. Okay, people talk about organic ways to remove Bermuda grass. That's the way. It sucks. But it is effective. So. Okay, any other questions before we move on to containers? Yes, ma'am.
Expanded shell, is that just like a little rock?
Effectively, it's shale that has been moistened and then thrown into an oven, and it pops like popcorn. And so it's got these little puff balls. Now you've seen the little white pellets in garden soil. Okay, that's perlite or vermiculite, but that's about what it'll look like. It's something very similar. But it's a rock formation, and so it's stable in the soil, permanently pretty much. And so it kind of is one of those long-term, you do it once and you don't have to worry about it type things. So, and it helps, like I said, it helps keep the soil structure broken up a little bit, and it can retain moisture in the real dry periods.
So
Yes, sir.
expanded shale, vermiculite, and perlite are all comparable?
Fairly much. Perlite and expanded shale is going to be a little bit better in your clay soils. Perlite and vermiculite, they kind of have a tendency to pop up to the soil level and kind of mix.
Unless they've changed, you can't find expanded shell at your big box stores, you'll have to go to your nurseries.
Yeah. So expanded shale is probably not available at box stores. So you'll have to go to garden centers. Any other questions on veggie gardens? Okay, containers, raised beds, that sort of thing, they're all the same thing. Raised bed is nothing but a very large container, okay? So, key thing to think about when we're talking containers and raised beds. All of the nutrients in those beds is what you put into them, because everything else is slowly going to get drained out. Or if you're talking something, like an actual container, there is no place else for them to actually suck nutrients in from. Okay, a raised bed, if it's a shallow raised bed, the roots will go down into the soil and they can kind of pick up some nutrients from deep down. But if you're talking, a container, what's in that container is all the nutrients that plant is going to have. Okay, so we're going to have a consistent, regular fertilization schedule on that. Okay, this is where soil samples don't matter. Okay, because you're providing all the nutrients for that plant. So we're going to have to keep nice, light fertilization all the time. Just kind of keep it, every couple of weeks you're going to add a little bit of a fertilized mixture to it just to kind of keep everything growing nicely. All right. When we're looking at soils, if we're building a raised bed, we're not going to take what we've got in the ground and build it up into a raised bed. We're going to actually want to put in a good, high-quality soil in there. The one problem with raised beds is they are extremely expensive to fill. Okay. Now, there are some ways that you can do to minimize that cost. I have 2-foot tall raised beds. Okay. These things are about 5 cubic yards each to fill. Okay. That's about $500 worth of dirt. Okay. Now, the way I stop, having to deal with that is all of the wood I have around my property that I've trimmed off of trees. Okay, so all the branches, all the clippings, everything like that gets piled up. When I build a new bed, all of that goes into the raised bed on the bottom. I can put a little bit of my native soil at the bottom as a clay shield to kind of keep the moisture from draining completely out of my raised bed. Because the soil I'm going to be putting in there is a well-draining soil. It's going to want to drain out, but I put that little bit of a clay barrier right at the bottom so that it kind of keeps the moisture there, but it's fairly deep, so any roots that go down can absorb it, but it's not leaving the roots, for the most part, sitting in water. I can do things like add wood chips, get the mulch from the city, just pour it into the bottom of it and build up a couple of inches that way. Another things I do is I take all of my junk mail and all of that sort of stuff, shred it up, add that into my raised beds. Okay? Best use of junk mail you'll ever find is fill in your raised beds. Now, it will break down over a year or two, and so you'll lose a little bit of that soil height. That's not a problem you'll amend next year anyhow. So a lot of these things you can do to help build up and fill up the space in the raised bed with organic material that will break down eventually. You know, a log, if you've got a fairly decent sized, 6, 8 inch tree branch that you've just trimmed off of one of your trees, that's gonna take 5, 6 years to decompose in your garden bed. So, it fills up a lot of space for free. So, it's one of these things you can work on. The top 6 to 8 inches of soil is always the best quality soil I can put in there, okay? Now, whether that be bagged, whether that be bought in as bulk, whether that's my own compost that I've just added in, it's whichever we can do, okay? I make a lot of compost because I use a lot of compost. And so I get all of mine for free, so, which is very nice. Because you're dealing with a small container a lot of times, especially with containers or even the raised beds, mulch can be very effective. The problem is, a lot of times you don't have a whole lot of room in the top of your container to actually add in a whole lot of mulch. I still do recommend about 1 inch worth of mulch minimum. That inch can do a lot to prevent a lot of moisture evaporation. Okay, doesn't do much for weed suppression, but you shouldn't really have to worry about weeds in containers as much. But it does do a lot for soil moisture retention. If you're dealing with a small to mid-size or even larger container, a lot of times people will put gravel in the bottom. They talk about doing it for drainage purposes. I'm usually not worried about drainage purposes for that. I'm worried about keeping a good, heavy center of gravity down low so that plant doesn't want to tip over. Okay, so but a lot of gravel around the bottom will help. You want to make sure that you have a hole in the bottom of any containers that you have so that excess moisture can drain out. If you do too much moisture in a container that doesn't have a hole in it, you'll get some really nasty aerobic decomposition at the bottom. You'll get hydrogen sulfide building up, and it can actually kill off your plants. So be careful. You can use water dishes on the bottom of them if you want. I do a lot of raised, a lot of containers. The problem with my containers is I can never remember to water them enough, so I always make sure I put a dish underneath so that I water them. All the water drips down, and then it's siphoned right back up into the plant over the next 2 or 3 days. Rolling bases. Yes, ma'am.
I'm sorry, what about hardware cloth or something for gophers or things?
If you're dealing with a raised bed, hardware cloth or something like that on the bottom of your raised bed is very useful. Understand you are putting a galvanized material in ground in your vegetable, especially if you're doing it like vegetable beds. So it's just something to think about on whether you want that there. But hardware cloth will prevent a lot of rabbits and other things from digging up and coming up through it. It will rot out after a couple of years though, because you are in a moist soil contact environment.
John, filling your bed, you didn't mention cardboard.
No, that would fall under my junk mail. Any cardboard, any organic material like that I can use, I'll throw into my raised beds. Yes, ma'am.
I think I've already messed up. Yesterday, I bought a blueberry bush to plant in a large container.
Yeah.
And I used, the good soil, potting soil, just a regular good potting soil.
Yeah.
And planted it, and then Donna and I were talking about it, and my question was how to get the pH down on that.
Okay.
But then she just showed me some soil that you can use for like strawberries and all that kind of stuff. So should I repot it real quick into different soil? Or?
What you can do, she's talking about blueberries. As Steve said, blueberries won't grow here in the ground. Where you can grow blueberries is in containers. Okay, that's because you can maintain that soil pH where you want. For you, if you've just planted it, if you want to try and find a soil mix that you can actually get that is a little bit more acidic, you can go ahead and do a quick transplant. Or you could just add some of the soil amendments that you can get for azaleas and that sort of a thing that are designed to acidify the soil. Okay, that's what you're looking to do. Some of the treatments they're going to be sulfur based, and any acidic type instruments will help acidify that soil a little bit. You're going to have to keep amending and checking your soil pH on a regular basis though, to help make sure that you actually get the crop coming out of it. The problem is our water is going to be running about a 7.5 pH. And so unless you're dealing with rainwater, which is running about a 6.7 pH, then you can go ahead and, if you're doing just rainwater, then you can probably go ahead and not worry too much about soil amendments after the first amendment to get that soil pH down.
I know coffee grounds will help a little bit, does it really make a difference, the coffee grounds?
I don't know about the pH, but coffee grounds are high in nitrogen